Welcome to another episode of the Stories from My Lights YouTube channel. Now, as we got done with that whole series about Craig, I need a little break from huge, long series of stories, so tonight I'm going to tell you an individual story that is made up off the top of my head. As I say these words, I don't even know what I'm going to tell my story about. Once upon a time, there was a house, and this house was much like any other house that you've ever seen. It had wooden siding, it had a roof, it had a living room, a dining room. It was much like any house you would see in any town or city across the country of the United States. But there was one very special thing about this house. You see, this house was in a place that had frequent lightning storms. These were not the normal lightning storms you may be accustomed to. You see, for these lightning storms occurred in a very small area, and they would come and go almost at will. At one point, the people living in this particular town had thought perhaps it was some sort of strange weapon, or magic, or perhaps even a curse. But over time, the townspeople had just gotten used to the strange lightning storms that would burst out and then disappear without warning, sometimes coming without even the cover of clouds. We find ourselves in the house that I previously mentioned, in the town with the lightning storms that I just talked about, during the middle of one of the aforementioned storms. Lightning was crashing and thunder was booming. The sky was lighting up as if some sort of white fireworks show was going on. And the very last lightning bolt of this mysterious storm happened to strike the roof of the house we just mentioned. The electricity happened to hit an outlet and travel through the outlet in the attic down into the basement where there was a vacuum plugged in. That electricity flowed through into the vacuum, and the vacuum turned on for a split second and then was silent. It all seemed normal. The next morning, there was the typical hustle and bustle in the house. The mom and the dad were getting their kids ready for school. Breakfast was cooking. There was a TV playing an episode of Scarab McJohnson and the Strange Dogs of Justice, which happened to be the kids' favorite show. There were toilets flushing, blow dryers on, even a little music. As hard as it may be to believe, that was the first sound that Vacky the vacuum heard. What? You might be saying, who is Vacky the vacuum? That vacuum that got struck by lightning had found itself in a strange predicament. For the next morning, it heard the commotion in the house, and it thought, what is that? And then it thought to itself, what am I doing? Is this thinking? And then it turned on, and then turned off, and it thought to itself, this is all very confusing. The mom of the house, who we will call Laura, walked downstairs when she heard the vacuum turn on and saw that it was plugged in and thought, there must be a glitch, perhaps a blown fuse for this vacuum to strangely turn on. And so she unplugged it from the wall. This didn't stop Vacky the vacuum from thinking. In fact, Vacky the vacuum said, what is that cord? Why is it attached to me? How do I move? Help! And he was kind of freaking out because imagine being a creature waking up for the very first time and not knowing what you are and not having a family or parents or friends or grandparents to show you what to do or who you are and to teach you how to behave. Just imagine just popping into existence and then not knowing what was happening. Well, Vacky the vacuum just stayed downstairs and was thinking to himself, who am I? What am I? And while he was doing so, he listened to the commotion and hubbub of Laura and her family upstairs until finally he heard the banging of doors, the motor of the garage door closing the garage door, and then there was blissful quiet. This was when Vacky discovered he had wheels. And he discovered if he moved these wheels, he could roll around and zoom about the basement. He zoomed into his father's weight bench, knocked over a bunch of weights, zoomed back, and felt a new feeling. You and I would call it fear. Vacky did not yet have a name for it, but he knew he didn't like it. And then he zoomed over to the staircase, for he was in the basement. And he looked up the staircase and thought, how on earth am I going to get up this staircase? This is when he discovered some other amazing function of his wheels. If he turned them really slowly, he could tilt himself backwards and the front of his vacuum would raise. And then if he slammed on his wheels really hard, whoop, he could get himself up on the step. So through this really awkward process of raising lowering, raising, lowering, raising, lowering. He eventually made it up the stairs. Now the upstairs of this house had wood floors, and it had a big circular pathway that led from the living room to the kitchen to the dining room to the family room to the door to the garage to the laundry room and back to the living room. And Vacky was just zooming in circles over and over. He hadn't had a good straightaway where he could zoom before, so he thought this was very, very fun. Now, of course, imagine a person learning to walk for the first time. They stumble a lot, they put their hands over everything, they pull things down. Vacky was slamming into walls, knocking paintings down. He knocked over a folding chair that had been set next to the dinner table. He even accidentally smashed some Christmas ornaments which had still been left out. But he didn't care because he didn't know that those things were important and he was having way too much fun. The next thing Vacky did was he saw the toilet. He looked inside of it and thought, that's interesting. He wanted to go inside and see what the toilet was all about, but the bowl was far too high for him to get inside of. One of the children had left a toy called magnetiles laying on the ground, which are basically just these cool plastic blocks you can stick together with magnets. These were the ramp kind of magnetiles. So Vacky pushed both of the ramp magnetiles over to the base of the toilet, and then he backed up and he zoomed as fast as he could, flew in the air a little bit, and then landed fresh in the toilet. Well, he discovered he didn't like the feel of cold water upon himself. And he also discovered he was stuck because his wheels had no contact with anything. So he just sat in the toilet, zoom, 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 spinning, 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 spinning. This may sound shocking to say, but eventually, Vacky actually fell asleep because strangely enough, when he was disconnected from his wall outlet, he needed to sleep to regain energy. Well, you might imagine the mom, Laura, came home and walked into the bathroom and saw a vacuum sitting in the bowl of the toilet. First, she screamed, assuming there must be a burglar in the house. And none of the kids were home and neither was her husband. So she grabbed a baseball bat and prowled around the house looking for burglars. And when she was satisfied there was no burglars, she checked all the doors and all the locks, and then she even checked the security footage for the security camera. There was no sign of a burglar, but what she saw disturbed her even more than if there were a burglar or perhaps an evil janitor wielding a scythe in their house. She saw a vacuum with no cord zooming all around her house, knocking things down. She saw, because they had security cameras all over the house, she saw the vacuum push magnetile ramps into the bathroom and then use them to fly into the toilet. She sat down and she said, "Laura, the stress is getting to you. This can't be real. This can't be real. This can't be real." After she said this to herself, she walked into the bathroom and looked at the toilet once more. The vacuum was still sitting there, motionless, silent, quiet. So she took it out and set the vacuum on the ground and looked at it. But before she could really get a look, Vacky tore off. He had never driven with wet wheels before. It was slippery and he was flying into everything, and Laura was chasing behind him screaming, "You're getting toilet water all over the floor!" Vacky stopped, and something surprised him. He could understand Laura. How or why he could understand the English language is a mystery that neither you nor I will ever solve. Just as how he came to life is a mystery. However, he could understand her. So Vacky stopped rolling around all over the place, rolled right up to Laura, and he felt the words "I'm sorry" inside of him, but he had no way to express himself. So he just tilted back on his wheels 2 times and then stood stationary. Laura just stood and stared at the vacuum and said, "Are you alive?" And Vacky thought, I want to answer yes, but how do I do so? So he leaned back once. Laura, fortunately, was a very smart woman, and so she decided to ask another question, which she also knew would have the answer yes. "Are you a vacuum?" she asked. While Vacky didn't particularly know what the word vacuum meant, he somehow knew he was one, and so he tilted back one more time, yes. And Laura went, "Oh my God, this is amazing. Wait, let's try one more time. Can you understand me?" And Vacky, once again, tilted backwards. For no reason at all, Laura started running around the house, waving her hands above her head, going, "Oh, I love vacuums, I love vacuums, I love vacuums." Now, before you might judge her and say, perhaps she's gone a bit crazy, you may realize that she had just seen a living vacuum on her security camera zoom around all by itself and found out that her vacuum through means of a very remedial form of sign language, could actually communicate with her. "Come here, Vacky," she said, and she sat down on the couch. Vacky zoomed over by her and paused. It sat watching her. Now you might be wondering, how could a vacuum watch a person? Well, to that I have no good answer, but what I can tell you is this. He could see her, though he had no eyes. It was almost an image that would formulate inside of his mind. How it worked, why it worked, is not important to this story. But what is important is that Laura turned on the television and sat and watched a show to try to relax. And she patted the couch and lifted Vacky up next to her, and Vacky sat watching a show with her. It just so happened Vacky really liked the show The Simpsons. Well, anyway, the father, who was named Jeff, came home and saw his wife sitting and watching The Simpsons with a vacuum sitting next to her. And he made a joke and he said, "Oh, you got a new friend." And Laura looked at him and said, "You don't know the half of it. Come here." So she had him come sit on the couch and said, "Jeff, you are not going to believe this vacuum can talk." And Jeff was just like, "No, he can't." And she said, "Vacky, can you talk?" And Vacky rolled back once and then rolled forward. And Jeff said, "What? That's really weird. How did you make the vacuum move like that?" And Laura said, "Watch this." And so she lifted the vacuum down and set it on the floor and then went and sat back on the couch. She held out her hands to make it clear there was no remote control anywhere. And then she said once more, "Vacky, would you like to know my husband's name?" And Vacky nodded back one more time for yes. And Laura said, "This is my husband, Jeff. Jeff, this is our new vacuum child, Vacky." And Jeff said, "Laura, I don't want a vacuum child. What kind of strange trick are you playing on me?" Because she could totally understand Jeff's confusion about the situation, she went and showed him the security camera footage, both the footage of the vacuum moving around by itself and then the footage of the vacuum in the toilet. Jeff sat there silently and then started mumbling strange noises because his brain was clearly malfunctioning due to the strange events of the day. Not much more happened that day. They went to bed and they slept, and the vacuum stayed in the room next to them. Now, they didn't show their children that night, but the next day, they introduced their children, Alden and Ronaldo, to the vacuum. And both of the children were freaking out because they thought it was a joke and that their parents were showing them a really cool robot or even some sort of technology or maybe even magic. But when the reality hit home that they had a new vacuum, they were absolutely shocked and flummoxed. But quickly, they took the vacuum into their playroom and started playing with it. Vacky learned how to push magnetiles around to build things. He learned how to play with Hot Wheels cars. He even learned how to lift up the front of the vacuum and set it down on the controller to play very basic video games. The kids grew to love the vacuum so much that they would let the vacuum sleep on their bunk beds with them at night. And as strange as it sounds, slowly and over time, Vacky became part of the family. He learned to say more things. He could say yes, no, hello, I'm happy, I'm sad, more, and just your basic words. But for a vacuum, it was enough. Now, they tried very hard to keep their living vacuum a secret because they were afraid their friends and their family and the townspeople, perhaps even the police or strange scientists in the government, they didn't think they would believe them. And so it happens that one day when Alden and Ronaldo and Laura and Jeff were all out of the house, an unexpected visitor came. And I might say not only unexpected, but very unwanted. For at their back door, which is made of glass, came the sound of shattering. A man wearing full black clothes with a black snow cap over his head punched through the door, reached in, unlocked it, and walked in. He walked immediately upstairs and went into the bedroom and started looking for jewelry or other things that he could potentially steal. Well, Vacky had saw him come in and didn't know what to do. He knew this person was not supposed to be here. He also knew that he had to do something because he cared very much about his family. It was not lost on him how loving and caring and accepting they were to take a vacuum and bring it in as if it was their own child. So he rolled as quietly as he could to the staircase, and as fast as he could, he got up to the top of the staircase, and then he sat there, still as a real vacuum, He was acting, pretending to be an inanimate object as camouflage. Well, it worked. Once the burglar was done ransacking through Laura and Jeff's bedroom, he came out carrying a bag filled with jewelry and coins and went immediately across the hallway to the kids' bedrooms and started snagging rocks, crystals, video game systems, anything he thought was beautiful, and put it in his bag. He got to the top of the staircase and started walking down when suddenly Vacky raised himself up as high as he could and smacked the man in the back of his head with the vacuum handle. And the man went, "Ow!" And as he said "ow," he leaned forward, stumbled, and fell down the stairs. Well, now the man was laying at the bottom of the stairs. The man we shall call, from now on, burglar, holding his head and holding his ribs, going, "Oh my God, that hurt." Oh. Before he could move, Vacky was down the stairs in an instant. I should tell you, even though Vacky's cord had been cut, some time ago his cord had grown back, and he could reel it out and reel it in, kind of like a tail that he could control. So he went down to the man and wrapped the cord around his arms as fast as he could, and then wrapped it around his legs, and then wrapped it around his mouth. So the man was laying on the ground, mumbling, while wrapped in a vacuum cord, until Laura and Jeff and the family came home. Vacky was standing over the burglar and feeling quite proud of himself, if I might be honest. And Laura said, "Did you do this, Vacky?" Vacky nodded yes. Jeff said, "Vacky, would you like some extra electricity tonight?" Vacky said, "Yes, yes, yes, yes!" They plugged Vacky in, which made him just feel very energetic and happy, and then they went and watched the security footage. This is when they realized Vacky was the best security system they had ever had because nobody would suspect it. And so they went down to their basement, where for no reason whatsoever that makes any sense, they had a cloning machine. It was an experiment that Jeff had been doing because he had been trying to clone Pepper's hot tamales so he could make a trash bag full of hot tamales that he could eat all in one sitting and see if he could breathe out fire. He tried that and it made him very sick and he never did it again. And he actually forgot about the cloning machine in the basement. But now that he remembered, he cloned the vacuum 5,000 times. And there were literally 5,000 little Vackies zooming all over the house and out in the neighborhood in the cul-de-sac. And one by one, they called all the people in their town and said, "Here's our new security system, the Vacky 5000. And one by one, all the townspeople paid $100 to buy one. And every house had its own Vacky. And the Vackies learned to vacuum. They learned to be friends to the children and the adults, and even to watch after kids, to let pets out in the daytime. But more importantly, they provided security. This town never had another burglary again. And before long, everyone in town grew to love their vacuums. And over time, people from neighboring towns were coming over to buy vacuums too, which made this town very, very rich. And they were prosperous and happy from then on. And that is the strange, perplexing, incomprehensible story about how lightning striking a random house made a vacuum come to life, which somehow cured a town of all of its crime problems. As you may guess, I haven't made as many stories up on the fly lately, so clearly I am rusty, because this is probably the worst story that I have ever made up. However, hopefully you got a chuckle or two, or perhaps you pooped your pants from laughter. Either way is good. And you will be more likely to fall asleep now. Alden, my boy, I love you with all my heart, and also all my overdeveloped huge pecs, and my weird lopsided face, and I love you with my toes, and my knees also. Have a very good night. You're such a good kid, I love you.